good, and you? So we're live streaming 360 video.
Just got myself on last week. It's a live stream on the Facebook.
YouTube actually. Yeah. So yeah, I'm using the guest connection. So it's enough, but it's enough. Yeah, it's great. I mean, the main platform is YouTube. You use OBS. OBS is I mean, it's quite simple. You just connect the camera, launch OBS,
Live switcher?
yeah. Are you doing video production?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're testing the camera, but it's streaming in 1080, which is fine on mobile. But we are upgrading for 4K camera. Because 1080 is fine on mobile. The desktop is a little bit blurry. What do you do?
Things start up with
We work with naked wines. Next week, actually, we will launch the first season of wine tasting session. So we will have 2 liters of wine last week.
on this Friday. Nice little show judges. So it's up in the valley.
Nice to meet you. Howard. Ivan.
Good evening, everybody. If anyone hasn't checked in yet and hasn't actually received a copy of their book, the queue is down now, so please feel free to jump out and do that, and we'll kick off in just a few minutes. Thanks very much.
Capitalize on all the boutique ones that are popping into it. It's just sort of mindset that they always like, young wineries, 5 years old, trying to get out. They have a big kick to their and they need labeling and administration.
morning. Everyone pumped up with a bit of excess? Yeah, come on. Look, I've got to be honest, when I took over Startup Grind at the beginning of this year, I said, look, there'll be none of these breakfast events, no early starts. But wow, what a great turnout. Thanks so much for coming. So if you don't know me, my name is Brendan Yell, the director of Startup Grind here in Sydney. A long time ago, I founded a company called shopfree.com, and since then I now mentor at a number of accelerators, including Slingshot, AngelCube, Mirror D, and I also have a day job, which is I run the startup program for IBM Software. If you want to find me, I'm at Brendan Yell on Twitter, or there's actually a hashtag as well, which is Where's Yelly, because I do travel around a fair bit. Who hasn't been to a startup grind before? Who are the startup grind virgins? Oh, goodness me, there's a lot. Well, welcome to you. If you don't know Startup Grind, it's the biggest network of startup events on the planet. In over 200 cities and over 300,000 people have turned up to 3,000 events since 2010. We've got some pretty strong values which I think represent what the startup community is all about, which is just about helping people and giving back. If you come into the attitude of I'm here to actually help people, good things will happen. So my day job, as I mentioned, is at Software, so I run the startup program for them. So if you're a startup that's less than 3 years old or less than $1 million in revenue, we actually give you free hosting for 12 months. So if that's of interest to you, Software hosts people like Fitbit and WhatsApp, so some really high performance apps there. So if that's of interest, please come and see me. We also want to thank our partners, 360 Degrees. In fact, I'm actually streaming live on YouTube right now on 360 Degrees, so you can all wave too, because it's actually going out there. So 360 Degrees are a great startup, have been very generous in supporting us in streaming at our event today. We also want to thank our partner Slingshot. Ash is actually in town today because he's a guest of the Slingshot Accelerator Program. Slingshot was born out of Newcastle a few years ago, now runs accelerator programs for corporates around the country. So I'd please like to welcome up Craig Lambert just to say a few words.
I nearly wore that shirt today, I'm glad I didn't. So I'm not going to take too long. Just a little bit about our business, Slingshot. What we do is we bring corporates and startups together. So we started out as a pure accelerator. We've got our own $10 million investment fund, seeding high potential startups, $50,000 initially, another $100,000 as a follow-on. But what we found throughout our journey that startups really want access to corporates to help them scale. So we've run programs now for NRMA, HCF, Simplot, ING. So the uniqueness about the Slingshot model is that we actually do bring corporates and startups together. We do that through running accelerator programs. At the core of what we do in our program is a really strong curriculum. And for us, that's probably, we're incredibly proud of what we've been able to do. And this man you're going to hear from today, Ash Maurya, has really helped us do that. So the first 4 weeks that we take a startup through our program, really strong in the business model section, and it's all of Ash's content. And the best thing from a startup perspective is they get direct access to Ash. So any startup going through a Slingshot Accelerator program actually gets one-on-one mentoring with Ash, which is invaluable to their learning. So when we do surveys post programs and we ask them about the best bits of what we deliver, Ash's contribution is always really high. So I'm really excited for Ash to be here this morning, courtesy of the great Brendan Yell, talking to this group about what he does. So that's as much time as I'll take. Thanks very much, Ellie, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of hearing Ash this morning. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lambert. I won't say how many years we've known each other for, but I met Lambert when I was at Optus Fusion rolling out a broadband network, and he was like employee 2 of Yahoo in Australia to head up their growth. So Lambert's a great bloke, we've known him for a very long time, so cool, man.
Thanks, mate.
I also really want to thank our venue sponsor here today, Hall Chadwick. David Kenny has been a massive supporter of the startup scene here in Sydney. He mentors a number of programs, including Mirror D. And he's supported Startup Grind for quite a while now. So I'd just like to introduce David up just to say a few words and introduce Hall Chadwick.
Thanks everyone for coming. It's not often you sit here at in excess on visual just before you're walking up, which is great in Hall Chadwick. But what we do very briefly is we specialise in startups and helping companies grow globally, dealing with becoming very successful companies all the way from startup all the way to IPO. Some of our success stories are Freelancer, BigCommerce, and we also do IPOs for companies like Bailable that invest in companies that are in this space. So what we personally do is we're a firm of accountants, but we, as I said, do a lot of work with getting companies off the ground, from getting the foundations right to be able to operate in the US, be able to become do a flip up or their share plan. And rather than just talking about it, we've got hundreds and hundreds of examples we can draw on in exits. I think I've been involved in over 100 exits, and being able to help you make better decisions, meet better people, and hopefully pay less tax when you get that great exit. So we do a lot of work with, we're really proud to be involved with Startup Grind. I think we are the home for the Sydney chapter. We're involved with a lot of accelerators. Personally, I'm a mentor at Iterate and one of the founding guys at StartMate. So I've sat through thousands of pitches. I'm really looking forward to hearing Ash's presentation today. So thanks again for coming, and if you need any help, please give us a shout. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And there's actually a little brochure out the front just about what whole chat would do for startups, so please pick up one of those on the way out. Now, I'd love you to put some tweets out, so the hashtag is StartupGrind, and also we are taking questions later from Ash. So if you go to slido.com, hashtag SUGSID, then you can actually, even anonymously, you can put up a question, the questions get voted up and down, and we'll ask those at the end of the talk. So, before we just get to Ash, I'd like to also just announce our next speaker. The next event is actually next Thursday. It's a bit of an odd date having two so close together, but we've had Ash in town just for this couple of days, and then Mick's actually flying out to the US 2 days later. So Mick, if you don't know who he is, he's the entrepreneur in residence at Murray. I actually met him when he was at a thing called Kazaa a few years ago. Remember Kazaa? Remember they shut down Napster? Well, these Aussie guys set up a copy of it called Kazaa, and I actually had to go meet them. It was above, it was on the same floor as the Minsky's Piano Bar at the Metropole Hotel in Cremorne. So I sort of trying to find this Office 21, so I'm walking around. I push the door open, I'm like, is this Kazaa? And they're like, yeah, who's asking? And I'm like, oh, okay, it's like that. Oh, I'm here to see Mick Levinsky. So Mick's been around the startup scene for a long time. He's heading off to the US to further his endeavours over there. So it should be, he's a very energetic speaker, so it should be quite the evening. So there's still some early bird tickets for sale for that. That's next Thursday night. So, our next speaker, what I'd like you to do is everyone get up, stand up, and we're going to give him a big Startup Grind Sydney welcome. He is the creator of the Lean Canvas. He's the author of Running Lean and Scaling Lean. Please welcome Ash Maurya. So, I need to switch on. I do it every week, I forget to switch on. We're good. Well, welcome to Sydney.
Awesome to be here.
Is this your first time?
Third time.
Third time?
Yeah.
Cool.
Third time, I think, in 2 years. Yeah. So it's rapid. And I'll be here next month again. Not Sydney, but Melbourne.
Well, there's Lambo showing you some kangaroos and koalas and some cool stuff like that.
He keeps me indoors mostly, but I get out every now and then.
Nice. You worked your hard. Cool. Actually, I'm keen to find out a little bit about your background. Can you tell me where you grew up and tell me about your high school career, that kind of stuff?
Sure. So my parents are from India, as most of you can probably guess, but I grew up in Africa. I grew up in Nigeria. That's where I was born. I lived there until I was 16. You asked about high school, but had a kind of strange high school background. So Nigeria was going through a lot of turmoil. So primary education was great, the secondary education not so good. And so my dad, not an entrepreneur, but very entrepreneurial minded, put together a private school, essentially took 5 of us out of the school. There was a big university there, and so it was private coaching with university professors, kind of an intense program. And I took the University of London O and A levels and kind of accelerated that piece of it. And then came to the US for university and have been there ever since, working and starting my own companies.
Cool. And how old were you when you went to college in the US?
That's another story. So I technically could have gotten in when I was 12, because I finished all the requirements, but I had to spend a few more years, spending some time in universities, repeating some courses. But I got in when I just turned 16 as a sophomore.
Wow. And what was that college?
Rochester Institute of Technology, so upstate New York.
Cool. And what did you do after college? What was your move there?
So I've always had the entrepreneurial DNA, I think. I've always wanted to start something. And so even while I was in college, I tried to start something, but that was on a student visa, and so you've got all these restrictions. So as soon as I left, I did the next best thing. I did some internship or co-op work at a big company, but it was a small project, so it felt startup-like. But the moment I could, I left and worked for another startup. And that company, like all companies, had several false starts, but eventually it found its way and had a pretty big exit. By then I had gotten my green card, and so I was able to then leave, and first thing I did is start my own company.
Cool. And what did you learn through that process of just going from a company that just came out of nothing to getting to an exit?
It was, yeah, so we all have this, those of you that, so people look at startups two different ways. Some people love it, some people never want to do it. I think the people who love it just have this romantic vision of what startup life is all about. And it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of perseverance and determination and grit. But what I've learned is that you have to channel that in the right places. So a lot of the companies and a lot of entrepreneurs I work with channel a lot of their determination around building the solution that they want to build, because they think if they do that, the world will see it and appreciate it. And I find that that's not always the case. So in this company, there was a lot of vision around the solution, and we were building products that nobody wanted, essentially. So the first 2 or 3 projects failed miserably. And I would say we found our way, but really by trial and error. So it was, and I think that can change. So that was a great learning experience, and it's great to do it on somebody else's dime. So I'm happy that I worked for another startup before going on my own journey. So I got that lesson very early on.
Yeah, I mean, there is a very romantic sort of idea of starting a company and then watch these TV shows and things are all wonderful. I mean, I often used to describe the fact that the most fun I had with Shop Free was the night I came up with the idea. And then everything else seemed to be like hard work after that. So, now talk to me about the lean canvas. What was the genesis of the lean canvas? Where did this idea from to kind of create or kind of formularize, a startup or a company? And talk to me, even for the people who don't know really what it is, a little bit about it as well.
Yeah, so the high-level concept of the lean canvas is it's a one-page business plan. So I tried writing business plans, when I started my company, because I at some point was seeking investment, and I got halfway through it and I said, this is just too hard. It's an awful waste of time because I'm just making stuff up as I'm going. And so I just wrote the executive summary, sent that out, and didn't quite connect with the investors. And so that was where I stopped writing business plans, and I just said, I'm just going to build a company, and good things will happen. But fast forward kind of a few years, I got sucked into the lean startup world, and a lot of what lean is about is starting with some fundamental assumptions. So what are the assumptions about your business? And I went about it saying, well, that's typically what we write business plans for, but that's a document that just takes too long. And so my first attempt was to document my core assumptions just in a spreadsheet. So I had a spreadsheet going, and I just started putting in assumptions in there. And then I ran into Alex Osterwalder's work with the business model canvas. And it seemed an interesting, but almost toy-like thing. It was this 9 boxes where you could take what typically goes into a business plan and put it on a single page. And I thought it was kind of interesting. I played with it, but it didn't quite connect with me, and I put it down. And then a few months later, I just had something kind of click, and I said, well, what if I change some boxes in here and really make it that all the assumptions I have, I put them in the right boxes. And that was the beginning of the lean canvas. I shared that on a blog post. It's actually still the #1 most read blog post of all the posts I've written. So it connected with the audience, and that to me is why I decided to explore further and started using that in my work, started using that in some of the workshops I was teaching, and then refined it from there to what it is today.
So do you think those traditional business plans are kind of outdated now? Like, I remember we did some for some billion-dollar projects at Optus, and there was some very dodgy numbers put in there, only designed to achieve an outcome that would then the board would approve. So do you think that kind of traditional business plan is kind of outdated now?
Well, so I don't have a problem with the business planning, but I have a problem with the business plan format. So I make the distinction. So I think the alternative, which is I fell into that trap too, is I went to the no plan alternative. Now the danger with that is that we just come up with ideas and we change them willy-nilly, and we never hold ourselves accountable, and that's not a great way to make progress. So I find that the lean canvas, the business model canvas, are kind of that middle ground. So you don't have to write a big document that no one's going to read at the end of the day, which is the problem with the business plan. And no one reads it because it's just such a big document. The value of it is in the thinking, in the exercise, and then in the conversation that ensues afterwards. That's why if you go to a more seasoned investor, they like skip the business plan, come and give me a pitch. And they'll use that as a way to judge whether your thinking is solid enough. So I feel that most people to get to the pitch need some building blocks, and that's where the Lean Canvas and other tools like that help. So you can kind of outline your idea, break it into its component pieces, look at how they fit together, and then you're ready to go and start the hard part, which is stress testing that business model.
I mean, everybody gets very excited about innovation in startups, but of course innovation happens in all sorts of places, not just in startups, it happens in corporates every single day. Talk to me about how corporates using the Lean Canvas now, and has that, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of going and visiting lots of corporates, and I'm always blown away when I see Lean Canvases on their walls, because going back just 4 or 5 years, I still remember the blog post that I wrote. It was written just for me with a lot of disclaimers, and I'm just happy to see how it's been picked up by them. But they too use it kind of in much the same way, which is in the corporate world, when you've got an idea, you have to go write a big business case. And just like the business plan, it's a big document that's very hard to write, lots of fictional numbers. And what the Lean approach is all about is go draw a line in the sand, take your best snapshot of what you know today, and even if you can't answer all the questions, that's great, because that identifies what you don't know. And our job as entrepreneurs is to go figure that out. So the next action item is get outside the building and get some of that data back, and then go pitch your business case or business plan. So in environments where I see people having to write formal documents, there's still a nice middle ground where you can, instead of spending 6 weeks writing a big document that is a fictional novel, you can take a few days writing creating a Lean Canvas, a few weeks validating, getting more information, and then writing your big formal document, and it's a nice combination there. So in the corporate world, we're seeing them use it in many different ways. Capturing ideas, it even gets used for release planning. So a corporation is like a really big startup, so they do massive releases, bigger releases, and so you can even use that as a release planning document to figure out what customers you're going to address in the next 6 months, what problems you really tackle, how you get the solution out to them, how you test it, what are the key metrics. So you can use it even at that granular level for the product itself.
So the corporate's noticing the benefits of that. So like, e.g., that the project can be approved, or just there's a time advantage there. Because at the end of the day, that's why disruptors can disrupt the incumbents, right? Because they can move faster. So are they seeing that kind of time benefit there?
Yeah. So most of this is still kind of in flux. I think the corporations have known for a long time that innovation has to happen. They know that if they don't disrupt themselves, their business model will get disrupted. If they have a choice, either they do it or someone else does it for them. So they've been in search for the right way to do this, and the Lean approach is one that I see many corporates experimenting with and testing out. How they use it are in many different ways. So places where I've seen them being applied, internal accelerators use this, so they encourage all the employees, or sometimes kind of a subset, to submit ideas, and the Lean Canvas is a great way to submit the idea. The power of it is that you have to think holistically. You can't just say, I'm going to build a great solution or a great X. You have to kind of think of the business model. So it makes the idea a lot more judgeable, and it makes it a lot more credible. So that's one way that it gets used. Once the idea gets accepted, then the team gets to work, does some of the traction validation, the customer validation, comes back and updates the business model. And that's the key part here, is that I haven't seen a Lean Canvas, even the ones I've written to date, that stay intact. You write it day one, and usually by day 2 or day 3, you're changing it already. Because it's all about the things that you don't know. So there's going to be an evolution of the idea, and being able to show that journey in a very powerful way to build credibility, a very powerful way to show how the idea has legs. And so we see corporations using it in those ways as well.
Yeah, you mentioned validation there. I think a lot of us in the past, when we've had an idea, we've gone out to our friends and gone, oh, will you buy my product? What do you think? Isn't it a great idea? And all your friends go, yeah, it's
Or your
wonderful.
mom.
Your mom, your uncle. How do you go about making sure the validation you're doing is actually valid?
Yeah, so I guess there are two things. The first thing is, it's perfectly okay to go and reach out to friends and family, but immediately discount the advice. Use that more for practicing your pitching or practicing your interviewing skills, because you're talking to a friendly. It's easier to kind of get outside. If you've never done any customer conversations, it's good to practice that way. But your friends, your family are biased. So depending on their perception of entrepreneurship, they'll either advise you for or against pursuing what you're doing. So I usually discount that advice very quickly, and I use them to get to their friends, so friends of friends, and then pretty soon you're talking to strangers, you're talking to your real customers, and that's what you want to do. But the next thing, and this is a very key part, is that I never place any weight on what customers say, because it's not about what they say, but what they either did in the past or what they're going to do in the future. And so what I'm interested in the past is, if I'm exploring a problem, I want to see evidence that they are struggling to solve this problem. Because if they say this is a nice problem, but I do nothing about it, if I give them a product, they're probably going to do nothing about it either. So it's really a nice to have problem. So I want to see evidence in their past that they're doing things about the thing I'm trying to solve. And then the part about the future is when I do show them a demo or I do show them my product, I want them to immediately take some action. The best action is pulling out their credit card or pulling out hard cash and saying, here's why I want this product, I'll pay you. But there are other proxies. You can get other things that are valuable, like their time, other kinds of investment. They can do a pilot with you, that's where they invest with time. They can even give you an email address. It's a permission to follow up. They can make referrals to other people. So all of those are proxies of payments that you can use.
And we hear a lot about, especially here in Australia, we go after a global market, or we pick a smaller market and kind of monopolise that. And it's something we hear a lot of different opinions on here in Australia. Talk to me about it, because obviously you want to be able to go into a big market, you want to be able to get some traction in there, but just talk to me a little bit about this sort of global market or sort of dominating a smaller market.
Sure. So I guess on the first hand, I feel like there is no right or wrong answer. One of the first things that I do, and this is a kind of a deviation in the second book, I really start highlighting the goal first. So I've seen lots of entrepreneurs that don't really know what kind of a company they want to build, and they kind of just go along with the bandwagon effect. So just like we have couch surfing, we sometimes see accelerator surfing. So there's one team in particular that comes to mind. I met them when I was in Chile doing a talk. They were an accelerator there. I then went to Denmark, all the way across the world, and they were there as well. And then I went to Arkansas, of all places, and they were there as well. This was in a span of 2 years. They were just going from one accelerator to the next with the same idea. And so I sat them down finally and said, your idea is not getting funded. You're probably looking at accelerators as a development leg to help build your idea out, but there's something broken here. And when we kind of broke it out, their idea could potentially be bootstrapped, but there was no investor interested in it. And they eventually killed it off. And to me, that is progress. You need to kind of figure out what you want to do. The accelerator route for them was the wrong one. So the reason I kind of went down that direction is that you often have to start by asking, what is your why? If you were to build a company, what is that minimum success criteria you want out of this business? First, and there's usually a number for everyone. And sometimes it's a revenue number, sometimes it's an impact number, but you want to start with that, and that's going to constrain the options that you have, which is a good thing. Constraints are actually good. So the kind of businesses I like to build typically are not investable in the first few years because I want to show kind of traction. So I tend to do small scale things, and if they work there, I then start thinking of larger and larger scale. And so I never even consider talking to investors for the first several months until I have something that's interesting to show. So again, I feel that you have to ask yourself, what are your ambitions? If you want to build a global company day one, that should be part of your goal, but you have to still start locally to go global, I feel, because that's where your strengths are. But strategically, everything you do has to kind of align with that following. And if you're perfectly fine kind of bootstrapping and doing something local in your community, you can still build a very valuable business that way.
Cool. We hear the term product market fit a lot, and I think we all have a bit of an idea of what it is, and we know it when we see it, because it's usually a retrospective, not what is a product market fit. I know you're quite passionate about it. Just talk to me a little bit about what you see product market fit as being when it's a tick.
Sure. Yeah, so I think Eric Ries kind of famously said, if you have to ask if you have product market fit, you probably don't, because you would have known it already. So it's, again, we always have this qualitative definition. It's when the hockey stick curve starts to really take off. That's when good things are happening. Customers are beating your door down because demand is through the roof. So we know when it happens, but it's more interesting to know how to get there, or what is kind of the ballpark of product market fit. So in, again, the next book, which all of you have a copy of, I begin to describe, so just as I talked about the goal, if you take the goal of building something, like let's say I'm writing a book and I want to sell 100,000 copies, if you look at the way businesses grow, they don't grow linearly but non-linearly. So there's a formula that you can use there to kind of ballpark what product market fit might look for you. I'm a big advocate of the 10x rule, and so if my goal is to sell 100,000 copies of a book in 3 years, product market fit is about, just using an order of magnitude estimate, it's about 1/10 of that. So if I can get to 10,000 books sold, that qualitatively is my product market fit ballpark. And so that's how I tend to kind of ballpark what product market fit might be and put a number to it. So again, the book is all about figuring out your traction metric. So traction, again, very overloaded term, but figure out the thing that you want to measure that will tell you whether your business model is working. Create some kind of a goal in the future, not too far into the future, and then use this order of magnitude estimation to get kind of some ballpark of what product market fit might look like. So it's better to have a goal that you're driving towards than just leave it undefined. And that again was going to constrain the types of experiments, the types of strategies and things you put into play to get there.
Cool. So just on the books there. So the first book, Running Lean. Just talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, just what was the transition into scaling Lean? How things have changed?
Yeah. So the Running Lean book kind of had two big epiphanies, or it had one big epiphany, and then a lot of it was how to do it. But the big epiphany was realizing that the solution you build is not the true product. As entrepreneurs, the business model is the real product. And the business model is made up of the solution, but many of these other component pieces, like who your customers are, what problems do you solve, what are the channels, all the pieces that go into the lean canvas. And like a product, you can very systematically apply techniques to build out a business model. So that was the big kind of idea in the book. The rest of the book was how to go do that. And it was all about the entrepreneur to customer conversations, because customers essentially hold the key to the business model. If you build something of value, you get to kind of finish your product, you get to capture value back, which is getting paid, and then that's how the business model works. So the book was a lot about that entrepreneur to customer conversation. It's a very tactical how-to book. It talks about how you go and extract what customers want, not by asking them, but by doing these customer interviews, observation techniques to understand what they really need, and then building those things. The minimum viable product, all those concepts are described in that first book. So once that book came out, we activated a lot of people. They started getting outside the building, started talking to customers, getting lots of learning. They came back inside the building to their stakeholders and said, we went and talked to 10 people, and they said they'll buy the product. And the stakeholders go, that's not enough. Yes, you learned something, but I don't see how this is a problem worth solving yet, because we want to see revenue, we want to see ROI, we want to see all these metrics. This happened both in the startup world, but also more so in the corporate world, because they judge every idea like they know how to judge, which is let's put traditional financial accounting metrics in place. So that was a big problem. So the learning itself not enough, and so I began looking for other ways to solve that problem. So scaling is very much written for the entrepreneur, but it's about the entrepreneur to stakeholder conversation. How can you change the dialogue when you're doing something innovative like a startup, even inside a big company? How can we use other metrics other than traditional financial accounting metrics to talk about the idea? How can we measure that? How can we test whether ideas are big enough to go solve? And so the scaling in the scaling lean has kind of a dual meaning. It really comes into play when you're trying to scale your product. So beyond the initial early customer validation, even the minimum viable product, as you begin to grow your product, things don't get clearer, they get murkier. Because we don't quite understand, we start to get lots of customers, we start asking for lots of conflicting things. How do you manage all that? Also, along with product growth, you sometimes get team growth. And as you bring more team members in, trying to stay lean becomes a challenge in itself. So the book kind of goes into some of the metrics that you need to put into place so that you and your investors are speaking the same language. It also talks about some of the systems and processes that you might put in place to help you practice this as your team grows, as your product grows.
Cool. A lot of successful startups are born out of an idea that was experienced by one of the founders. E.g., oh my God, I can't get a cab. Or e.g., I can't, well, I almost mentioned Uber. Oh, I did it, damn it. But then other people go, I just want to start a company, and they look around for ideas. Is there one right or wrong path there? Can success come from both sides?
I think it can absolutely come from both sides. It can be a deliberate search for problems, but the easier one, of course, is when you get hit by this lightning bolt. So it's this observation or insight The scratch your own itch is the best hack to start something because you see something. The only caveat there is that you have to realize that you are not the customer. Because your customers didn't get the idea to go solve the problem, they just live with the problem. So when you talk about the Uber story, lots of people have gotten stranded, not been able to find a taxi, but these two guys decided to do something about it. And so by definition, they're not the customer, but they have empathy for the customer problem. But what was even more important in that story is they quickly built a minimum viable product. So their first minimum viable product was a little SMS button, a magic button that they could use. One black limo cab in San Francisco, they would come pick them up, and then now there are hundreds and 100,000 of them around the world. But the insight there again is that if you observe a problem, kind of start validating that quickly. You have to make sure that the market is big enough that other people have that same problem that you're running into, and that you can go and build something valuable. On the deliberate search side, there too, I see many entrepreneurs come to me and said, I know it's about finding problems. How do I go about finding problems? That's like, if you go searching for problems, the solution space is infinite because you can find problems everywhere. So there I recommend that you constrain it somehow. So pick an area of interest. So pick either a customer segment you want to serve or something you're passionate about. It could be cooking, could be cars, doesn't really matter. But immerse yourself in that environment, go and talk to people in that space, and that constraint will allow you to then see problems people are stumbling into, and then you can apply a lot of the validation techniques to see is the problem big enough, and put on your entrepreneurial hat and then go solve those problems.
Cool. I mean, you meet with a lot of startups around the globe. Is there one thing you just keep running into where they go, oh my God, they're doing this as well? Like, so what are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing? You must see them over and over again.
Yeah, the biggest one is what I call the entrepreneurial bias or the innovator bias when I go and talk to corporates and just change the word. But it's this love for the solution. So when we get hit with an idea, there's usually an observation of some problem, but what we spend most of our time about is how we go solve it. And very quickly we are pitching the solution and living in the solution world. And so my new mantra and the thing that I start to get people to kind of get their head around is this thing of loving the problem, not your solution. And it's such a simple but very powerful concept. And if you look at it this way, if you start with a solution, a fully built out solution, it's like building a key, but you don't quite know what door that's going to open. And so you go searching for doors and you may find the right door. Some people do, some people never do. But if you flip that around and say, let's start with the doors, let's actually find which doors we do want to open, building the key is a lot easier. So that's kind of the mind shift that I get people to try to make, and it's kind of rampant. You see lots of people chasing solutions, not problems.
Cool. I've heard you're a pretty voracious reader. Talk about some of the best startup books or the books that have had the biggest influence on your career and your life.
Yeah, so I read a lot, but I'm a very deliberate reader. So I read, not surprisingly, with a problem in mind that's kind of keeping me up at night. So the books that I read kind of vary, lots of different disciplines, lots of different domains. Some of the classics, so I come from a technical background, so definitely read a lot of technical books, a lot of the lean books, of course, for the work that I do. But things where I had weaknesses in things like marketing, some of the classic books is Robert Cialdini's Influence, great book. I'm a big fan of Seth Godin. A lot of stuff he writes I consume voraciously. More recently, I read a book called Play It Bigger. It's a great book on category design, kind of an old concept. Jack Welch is famously known for being of going into markets where the company could be number 1 or 2 and then killing off all the other products. It's that idea, but applied with a more deliberate sense. So when you think social network, what do you think of? You think Facebook. When you think kind of on-demand transportation, you think Uber, not the Lyfts of the world. So how do you design a category? The book is a pretty interesting read on how you do that. So that's a great book that I recently read. I love Peter Thiel's book as well that he came out with. So I read different books, but I'm again very deliberate in terms of what problem that's keeping me up at night. I go looking for the books there.
We've got some questions from the audience, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
The first one's about Simon's next TED Talk, which is about why. That we don't buy what you do, we buy why you do it.
Yes.
And the question was, why startups all about how? So just talk to us a little bit about your opinion on that.
Yeah, so if you follow my blog, I actually have Simon Sinek's Golden Circle on there, and I adapted it kind of in a slightly different way. So he talks about a lot about the difference between, say, Apple and Dell and how they communicate products. But I look at it from the entrepreneurship angle as well. So for everyone who may not be familiar with it, the inner circle is your why, then is your how, and then it's your what. A lot of entrepreneurs live in the what. So they're more about what are the things we want to build, and that's where the solution lives. But you have to go into your deeper why. So when I talk about the goal, your ambition, your why, that's where you need to start with, because without that, the what's are kind of too far out. So you have to really get kind of deep, and it's an uncomfortable conversation, but that's where your vision of the world kind of lives in. That's where the vision of yourself kind of lives in as well. What kind of a company do you want to build? Then the next kind of outer circle from there is the how. So once you know the why, that's when you formulate, so in a business modeling perspective, the why is where your vision is. The how is where your strategy is. So how do you get to that destination? So this might be, I talked about the accelerators. If I'm trying to build a bootstrappable company, why go apply to an accelerator? I should be bootstrapping instead and conserving resources. If I do need to get lots of investment, then I should actually stop building it and try to get those partnerships and those investors lined up first. So again, your why will dictate the how, and then the what's are kind of where the experiments, where your product lives. Those are kind of your day-to-day stuff. So that's how I tend to look at the lenses. So one is kind of vision, very far outlook. The next is your strategy. How do you kind of create milestones to get there? And then the what's are your more tactical metrics. So how do you really kind of navigate day-to-day?
Cool. Yeah, and I love that TED Talk. I watch it quite regularly, so it's just a good reminder sometimes that we get a bit too focused on product and not enough about our beliefs.
Yep.
Next question is about startups and corporates. So basically, there's a risk that corporates can try and build stuff themselves, and that might fail. And just sort of, what does the relationship between corporates and startups look like? Because obviously, with a lot of the corporate accelerator programs, they're trying to get some of the startup methodology into their company. They're maybe even trying to attract talent. They're trying to educate some of their staff on this is how you do it lean. Just talk to me about the relationship there between startups and the corporates.
Yeah, so I would say that corporates, so corporates are aware that they have a problem. That is, their business model has a finite shelf life, and it's going to get disrupted. The problem is that the way disruption happens is, at least disruptive innovation is a very long life cycle. It doesn't happen in a short time scale. And when I talk about the metrics, you're going to see no revenue, no ROI for a while, because the disruptive thing that you're doing seems like a toy in the beginning. So many corporates aren't equipped to go and invest in those types of things, and so they end up looking, if those of you that are familiar with the Horizon framework, they tend to look at more immediate cash cows in the business and work on optimizing those. And they may do some growth stuff, but the Horizon 3 stuff gets ignored, and that's where the startups really thrive. So they tend to build things that may not be interesting now, but may be interesting 3 years or 5 years from now, when they can come and interject. So some of the corporates out there kind of recognize this problem as well, and that's where they build in the internal accelerators. They try to build in the right cultures. I haven't seen lots of evidence yet that any one approach is better than the others. There's just a lot of figuring out. There are lots of hard problems to solve. We sometimes joke that a corporation is like a body. It's got kind of systems and processes to prevent itself from being extinct. So there are antibodies that will fight new innovation. So if you go and try to challenge an existing business, you're going to get killed by the people in the company, right? So being an entrepreneur, in my mind, is much, much harder, exponentially harder than being an entrepreneur, because you have to live with that reality. With the politics, you have to live with the reality of trying to build something that could potentially disrupt an existing business. So those are some of the kind of realities of why I still think there's going to be a place for startups and corporates. And in theory, corporations should never get disrupted because they have access to their customers, they have more resources than startups do. But the reality is that when we add people to the mix, they kind of mess everything up.
Are there some companies, let's say in the US, that you think are doing that particularly well, that have been able to still maintain their strength and size, but sort of agility as well?
Yeah, I think if you there are many models there. So if you look at the model of the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, they have done a number of things where they try to create this sense of urgency. There's no teams, for example, in Facebook. It's all kind of self-forming teams. Anyone can come up with an idea, build a team around them, go pitch it to a stakeholder, and get a slice of Facebook's traffic to go test that idea out. So they're given limited resources, a goal, and a time box. And if they can show results, they get to push that out to production and impact 1 billion people's lives. And if they don't, then they just silently kill the idea off. So that's one way of kind of creating that culture. If anyone's ever been to the Facebook office, there's actually the ceilings are all kind of open, and they just have this sense of, nothing's ever finished, we're always in motion. This is a temporary space, so we're going to probably move the next month because we're going to grow again. So they always kind of keep people on their edge because they want to create that temporary culture. Google has kind of a different culture, Microsoft, and everyone has their own culture, but they all kind of come at it differently. Companies that are doing lean, the one that I think is most advanced in this is probably Intuit. This is from my experience, some with them, but also seeing them kind of talk about it. So Scott Cook, who is the chairman, was their CEO, was the founder. He was a big proponent of the lean startup techniques, but he kind of instilled that in the company culture, and they have created some ways of bringing it into a lot of things they do. And they've also got the Horizon framework, and they leave their Horizon 1 products kind of intact, apply some of the principles, but where they use it very heavily are for the growing, the emerging, and then the brand new disruptive stuff. So they're really internalizing that, and I've done work with many others, and many of them are just in different spectrums of adopting. And again, by trial and error, I think some of them will make some great progress.
Just while we're on the corporates there, some industries, I suppose, are more easily disrupted than others. And obviously we're getting a lot of fintech disruption at the moment. Just talk about some industries and why some are more disruptable than others.
Yeah, so I think every idea has a shelf life. So I think every business will get disrupted at some point. And there was a study that was done by a Yale professor, Robert Foster, I believe. I may have gotten his last name wrong. But he did a study where he looked at the NASDAQ, and at the time of its formation in the mid-1900s, the average lifespan of a company on the NASDAQ was 100 years. So once you got in the stock market, you were set for 100 years. There was another study that was done just a few years ago, and they found that average lifespan has shrunk to 15 years. In the next 10 years, it's going to shrink even further. So what that tells us is that the pace of disruption is accelerating. So every idea has a shelf life, but with all the startup activity, with all the ease of building stuff, people are stumbling into things that are now beginning to disrupt the incumbents. So every industry, whether it's book publishing, insurance, we see a lot of that happening in the US. Lots of insurance companies are life insurance companies even are getting disrupted because they've just had this 100-year-old business that has been a great cash cow, but now there's room for innovation. So I don't think any industry is immune from that. It's just really a question of timing and also customer sophistication. Once they start desiring other outcomes or better outcomes, some startup out there will come and say, I can do that, and then that's when that cycle begins.
Is there a scenario where lean methodology doesn't work or really struggles?
Yeah, so I would say in cases where there's lots of certainty, so if you have a known problem and a known solution, so you have an existing product out there, maybe an internal product or even a customer-facing product, and you don't want to change the market, you don't want to change the specs, you just want to say modernize the technology, there's not a lot of uncertainty there. So it's really swapping out one thing for the other. You can still do a staged deployment, so make sure that you are building things, and that's where methodologies like Agile or Scrum or any kind of iterative process helps, but that's when you've got lots of known problems, known solutions. But the moment you have a unknown problem, unknown solution, that is the extreme high uncertainty environment. That's where the disruptive innovation, a lot of startups live. That's where this kind of really shines. But even in cases where you've got a known problem, but an unknown solution, that's again where you can apply a lot of these techniques because you're in search of that solution that's really going to stick. And that's where the iterations and the customer validation all helps in building things that ultimately people want.
Cool. Next question is just about the future of startup education. I think we're now able to much more rapidly educate people about the process of a startup. It was very different to 4 or 5 years ago and very different to 10 years ago. Just talking about what you think about the future of startup education delivery is.
Yeah, I think thanks to the internet, thanks to globalization, we can now get startup education out, and that's something that's definitely helped us in our own business. Is that just going back 10 years, I used to do some outsourced work with other countries, and it was even hard just communicating. But now we kind of have a more universal language to communicate. But even with the lean language, we have a startup language with which we can communicate. So when I go to places and speak, I usually find the same percentage of people that are lean aware and lean knowledgeable in any part of the world. That percentage is about constant. And so that to me is very exciting because it says that people are hungry. The next breed of entrepreneurs can come from really anywhere. And while the world is not flat, the internet has made it a lot flatter. So we are going to see more and more people consuming content online, using remote like MOOC models, what the universities are investing in. We do a lot of content as well, and we deliver it online. So I just feel like that's the future. You're going to get the education out there, but the language has changed. So in the past, we used to struggle with building. Building used to be very hard. To be able to build a product, you had to get expensive licenses, you had to get expensive office space, all those types of things. But with the flatter world, building now becomes easier. The key question there is, do we know what to build? And that's where really the focus that I do with Lean is really about how do you figure that piece out. So I think that's where the education is going. How do you get people to be more entrepreneurially minded, but also kind of focused again on the problem, not as much that solution piece.
Yeah, this question's an interesting one for me. And it's, does the startup industry have a shelf life? I started my company back in 1999. It wasn't a startup, I suppose it was. We didn't call it a startup, we called it a .com company. We now have this startup kind of industry. Does the startup industry have a shelf life? Can these startup communities be disrupted themselves?
Yes. So I look at, if we look at the startup term, I think it's gone through, just like anything, it's gone through its hype curve, and it's probably still at its peak in many places. So I go to places where it's really cool to be a startup, and if you ever heard Dave McClure talk, he tries to get people down to earth, because being a startup is really, really hard. It's not fun work. It can be very depressing work most days. So it's a lot of hard work, but we look at the glory and bask in that glory of going to the events and saying we're a founder and putting big titles and wearing very good t-shirts.
Converses.
And Converses, yeah, jeans. But that's not what it's all about. So I feel like we'll always have new business creation. That has happened forever, since the beginning of time. So that's not going to change. So the job of innovation, or the job of creating and solving problems in a novel way, is not going anywhere. But the labels, whether we call it startup, or like you said, a .com, or a new business, a small business, I think those will come and go. But I still look at the fundamental drive to be an entrepreneur is not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, cool. I'll probably just a couple more questions now. So when is it time to set aside customer interviews and your lean canvas to focus on building your product? Or should you always continue to iterate the canvas?
Yeah, so it's a never-ending process, but I time box everything. So the very first thing, if you do have an idea out there, even if you've been working on something, is to dedicate no more than 30-40 minutes to take a snapshot of what your idea is, expose what might be riskiest in it at the moment, not what's going to be riskiest 6 months from now or a year from now, and then start working on that immediately. As soon as you start to do that, you're going to get some learning. You're going to come back to the canvas and update it again. So in the beginning, you're going to get lots and lots of thrashing. Your canvas will change, as I said. I look at startup life as baby years. In the beginning, babies change a lot. We measure their changes in days, and then weeks, and then months, and then it becomes years, and then as we get older, it becomes decades. And then we look the same till we die. So it's the same thing with your startups. Is you're going to go through lots of changes in the beginning. So you have to be, unlike a business plan, it's not set in stone. You have to be open to the fact that the learning is going to come at you very, very quickly, and you have to move very quickly. At some point, the business model begins to stabilize, but a lot of the tactics and the experiments and the strategies is where the activity moves to next. So while your lead canvas doesn't change as much, you're now trying to grow the business. You're going to start doing the growth hacking types of things. You're going to do channel building, business development. So startup life is never kind of boring, but the priorities will shift from figuring out the business model to now scaling the business model. So the canvas doesn't get touched as much at those stages.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great attractions to startup life, isn't it? That you're doing different things at different times. You're wearing a lot of different hats, a lot of balls in the air. So, look, I'm conscious that we finish on time today, because I know some people have to race off for meetings and different things. Ash is going to stay around and do a book signing. So if you want to ask him a question, get him to sign your book. We're going to do it just over there. But please join me in thanking Ash Maurya.